Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Messianic Rabbi Eric Walker. The very foundations of Western civilization are being attacked. America is abandoning the values upon which it was founded. In the time span of a single generation, the vast majority of American young men and women are no longer introduced to a biblical worldview, and the consequences are evident in the media every day. The Cultural Research Center was formed by Arizona Christian University in partnership with Dr. George Barna, one of the most respected researchers in America, to produce credible, nonpartisan research and analysis establishing the transformation impact of a biblical worldview on American culture. George Barna is a professor at Arizona Christian University and the director of research at the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian. He also founded the Barna Group, a research company that for years set the standard for understanding trends in American culture. Dr. Barna has written more than 50 books, including numerous award winners and New York Times bestsellers. He's also a fellow at the Townsend Institute, has taught at the undergraduate and graduate level, and has pastored 2 churches. You can find out more at culturalresearchcenter.com or georgebarna.com. And joining us now, as he does on the second Thursday of every month, the 11 o'clock hour, to talk about today the full results of the American Worldwide Inventory 2020 is our good friend, Dr. George Barna. George, I missed you, my friend.
Rabbi, it's good to be back with you. I've missed you as well. It was my fault last time, a technology glitch. That's what did us in.
It did. It happened, and it stole my joy. It did.
Sure, blame it all on me. All right, I get it.
It stole my joy, and I didn't have anybody. It was like I missed a play date.
Well, one of the things I think that you and I understand is that we're all flawed human beings and God chooses to save us. But in the process, we can't take ourselves that seriously. He knows what he's really working with here, and I think we need to as well.
I completely agree with you. The shift over the last 9 months with this COVID pandemic has exposed so much. It's been revelatory in so many ways about human nature, on a biblical worldview, on how people are reacting, responding, defiant, the election, the polarization of this. Truly, if you look at this, it seems we're like on the brink of a true civil war. There are people who are asking the question, are you willing to die to protect the Trump candidacy, the Trump presidency? And I'm thinking to myself, no. First of all, God appoints all leadership.
Yeah.
And because I'm one of and when I read this number, it was staggering, that like you and I right now together and with Jason, the 3 of us are a part of that 6% only 6% of the American population has a biblical worldview.
Yeah, and the implications of that, of course, are staggering because you do what you believe. And so when you realize that people believe so many things that have no basis in reality, no basis in the truth that God has given to us, and of course, that's based on the idea that God wants us to know the truth. A lot of people don't want to deal with the truth. They don't believe there is any truth. They believe they're the truth. There's all kinds of errant perspectives out there. Yeah, so when you put all of these different areas together that we've been studying, whether it has to do with human nature and human character, truth, morality, creation, the value of life, all these things and more that we've been studying, you begin to realize, wow, people get off track real early, and it's like that pilot who's off his flight plan by 1 degree right after he takes off at the airport. He thinks he's going to Baltimore. He winds up in Miami because just being off that 1 degree over the course of time takes you so far off track, you don't even remember where you were trying to get to.
John Trent, You know Dr. John Trent.
Yeah, sure.
Okay? John wrote a book called Heart Shift. And Heart Shift was based on the example he gave in the beginning of the book, was that if the moon launch was off 2 degrees and they didn't adjust for that 2 degree, that they would have missed the moon by 92,000 miles just by 2 degrees.
Yeah.
So his point was that if drift causes us to go off course, like on the water, if you chart a course with a ship, you don't adjust for the current and you don't adjust for the wind and correct your course and constantly, and you do it on the highway. You constantly, the wheel's always moving. You never just death grip straight. No, you're moving to adjust for what? Drift, or it's wind. That happens. There's small curves in the road. But if you just had that death grip and locked it on for straight, you'd be plowing through people all the way through. But we're so self-aware when it comes to self-definition, but we are so self-unaware when it comes to the drift and the shift and the consequences of our moving from a stable, incorruptible, foundational truth. When you veer just a little bit from it, there's consequences. You may not know them right away, but there are consequences, and it seems like people just don't care. Either they don't perceive it, or they just don't care. They don't believe it. It's mind-boggling to me that what is there, 50 billion copies of the Bible in print, and there's only 7 billion people in the world. That means there's 8 Bibles for every single human being on the face of the planet.
And of course, the issue is not whether or not you own it, but do you read it? Do
Right.
you believe it? Do you follow it? And that's where we lose the trail. You know, that whole analogy about missing the moon is important to me, because if you track back to the beginning of where did we go wrong? Well, at the very beginning, when you took off, you know, if you were off just a little bit right from the start, you're just going to keep wandering farther and farther from your target. And to me, that's important because as I've studied worldview development in America, of course, one of the things we found, and you and I have alluded to this before, that worldview begins developing in a person's life between 15 to 18 months of age, and it's almost completely developed by the age of 13. And so the problem is that most churches, most adults think, well, we'll really get busy with this worldview stuff when a person becomes an adult. Well, it's too late by then. They're so far off track. They've got such deep foundations that are going to be hard, if not impossible, to rebuild, that's too late in the game. And I would suggest that Satan knows this. A lot of evil people over the course of history, including Lenin, have talked about, man, you give me a child, and within a few years I'll be ruling the world, because if I can change their mind when they're young, that's what they're going to live the rest of their life with. And that's been proven time after time after time in the course of human history. And so here we are in America, we're facing this big challenge, and people are maybe waking up to it because of the 2020 election. But I mean, the 2020 election is a symptom. It's not a cause of anything. There's a much deeper root problem that we've got to wrestle with. And people are scratching their heads and saying, wow, how did we get here and what do we do now? And to me, I know I sound like the guy who's a hammer and everything looks like a nail, but to me, this really is about worldview, because what you do, what you believe. And so if we don't believe that there's absolute moral truth, if we don't believe that what we do every moment of every day matters to God, because we probably don't believe that there's a God who created us, who's holy, who's perfect, who's involved in our lives, who cares about us. I mean, I know from the data that, most Americans don't buy into those things. They used to at one point in time, but we've drifted, as you mentioned. And there's so many different areas of drift. The fact that 3 out of 4 Americans believe that all people are good. No, they're not. Pick up one of those 50 billion Bibles, open it up, and read the story. And you find out pretty quickly, no, we're not good. God's provided a way to deal with that, but we have to understand it. We have to participate with Him.
It's very interesting because if we apply that principle to developing a worldview, then at such a young age, and I think about my youth in the early 50s and the influence of the very strong Eastern European influence of my father, which was very heavy-handed. His father was a Prussian general, so you can imagine the product of a Hungarian, Eastern European Hungarian Jew whose father was a Prussian general. I to this day, I mean, he's been gone for 20-something years, but to this day, my mother and I both have had this conversation. She's 94, that I never had a conversation with the man. I never had a talk with my father. I was spoken to, but I was not entitled to speak. I hadn't obtained that status of the right to speak. It was the children to be seen and not heard, and that was the rule in our house. So when I became vocal, I became very vocal, and it was considered to be rebellion, and so I was shipped away to boarding school at age 14 because he couldn't handle that. That was and this was the 60s now. I was an American 60s kid. We talk, all right? And to him, this was like
anarchy, rebellion,
the abomination. I was Satan's child. I was the incarnation of the devil in his life. So he shipped me off, and I never returned. I mean, that's 55 years ago. I never came back home. I graduated at 16. I went to college at 16. I celebrated my 17th birthday in my freshman year on the campus of Penn State. I was never going to go back to that. So my worldview got developed exponentially as I began to hear causes. And so as a child of the 60s, it was causal. Vietnam. That was a worldview I had. I felt that it was wrong for America to be involved in cleaning up for the French again. There was economic war, and I didn't like the fact that I might have to go and have no choice. And I couldn't vote, and I lived in a state, Pennsylvania, where the drinking age was 21, the voting age was 21, and the draft age was 18. So you couldn't vote, you couldn't drink, but you could die. And I thought, well, this is the most unbalanced, how ridiculous. I have no say whatsoever. I said, that to me that's the world my father came out of. I want nothing to do with that. So I became very involved, and that began to shape my worldview. But yet I still had this core of, I'm Jewish. And that was a part of my, and it was uncompromisable. It was that, and still today, it's not a compromise. I'm a Jewish believer. I was born a Jew. I believe in a Jewish Messiah. I don't see any reason why I should give up being Jewish. When people say, when did I convert? I go, well, why would I convert? I got to convert to believe in a Jewish Messiah? That makes no sense at all. Isn't it great? You don't have to convert. Because if anybody had to convert in this equation, it'd be you. It wouldn't be me. All right. I'm born into it. We're both grafted in, of course. But my point is that it seems that my experience must have been somewhat unique in the fact that when I came to faith at age 44, out of the synagogue, but I guess my worldview was steeped in rebellion because I was so challenging to the rabbis of what biblical truth was, that when I would get in their face, studying with them, and keep going back to Genesis 3:15, that was the argument point. Okay, you show me where in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, that Genesis 3:15 was fulfilled, and I will shut up. But until you can show it to me, I am going to be here every single day in your face saying, show me where it is. And they finally threw me out. I mean, literally, the rabbi said, you can't come study here anymore. You keep with this Genesis 3:15. I said, but it's a prophecy of God. It has to be fulfilled, and you can't show me what. Well, Rabbi so and so said. I said, no, I don't want Rabbi so and so. I want. If you're going to give me one piece and say this is the foundation, I got to plant my feet here. You have to show it to me in here. And I mean, when Jews get into an argument, okay, we'll have lunch right afterwards. But
Yeah.
you've heard Israelis argue. You've heard two Jewish men argue. Two Jewish lawyers argue. You would, on the phone, you would think that hate, the hatred that this is, that this is the AK-47s and oh my goodness, there's blood's gonna be shed, and all of a sudden at the end of the call says, okay, well, I'll see you at the club at 12:30. We tee off at 1. You want to grab a drink beforehand, and okay, see you then, man, bye. And so that would be the end of a 1 hour heated sweat on your brow, sweat on your lip argument. It goes on in Israel every single minute of every single day. It's interesting from this side to look at my biblical worldview as being developed in a very unique way, antithetical to what the Christian Gentile norm would be. Because I had the Jewish ethics and the Jewish values instilled in me. That was part of my core.
Part of that, I believe, based on my experience with Jews around the world, has been that there is an inner desire to arrive at the truth. We only get it if we dig and we push, and we get some pushback, and we have to reflect on what we thought. It's like Paul going to Mars Hill in Acts 17, where he's having this debate with the people in the marketplace. And it's like, come on, bring it on. Give me what you got. Let's see what you got. And they love that. They even said at the end of the exchange, this was pretty cool. Let's come back tomorrow and see what else he's got. Because there's that joy in finding the truth of something. Right. I think that's one of the things that's missing in America. We don't take joy in the truth. We don't enjoy the journey, because we're a people who's been taught you need to be self-reliant. You need to be productive. You are what your accomplishments show you to be. And so don't waste time thinking about stuff. Don't waste time reflecting on truth. Whatever, move on, make something happen, and let's see your resume. What have you accomplished? And so it's a completely different way of thinking about life that I think is to our detriment, where we don't worry about the foundations on which we're building this. We're not interested in the reasoning process, where the scriptures say, come, let us reason together. Americans are like, no, let's go build something better together, because it's all about what have we accomplished? What have we achieved? So I think at some point, if we can get churches and particularly parents to be rethinking the model of what are we trying to accomplish here? Are we trying to raise clones of ourselves who are, stressed out because of all that we have to accomplish, all the stuff we've got to buy, the mortgages and loans we got to pay, all that? Or is it about, wait a minute, there's a better way of living. It's a relational way of living, and that relationship is based on who we know God to be, who he knows us to be, how we develop that relationship with him, how we see ourselves be refined through that relationship and become a better person, become the ultimate person not only that we can be, but that he made us to be. That's not on the minds of most Americans. I think it's to our detriment.
When you look at the data that came out of the survey, and I encourage everybody to go look at this survey and look at the statistics as to what the average American believer, how far away we've moved. And here we are, we're sitting on a house that was built 240 years ago. Would you not inspect the foundation of a 240-year-old house in 240 years? Would you just live in it knowing that the rains have come and that the foundation is built on wood? You know that there's termites and there's rot, and you know all those things, and the floor is buckling, and your foot goes through you just put a rug over it. And you don't do anything, and you let the foundation erode. And then one night you're laying in bed, and a storm comes, and the house collapses. And you're surprised, and it's tragic, and everybody's giving you comfort. And George Barna and Eric Walker are saying to you, well, what did you expect to happen? For 240 years, you never once maintained the foundation. Oh, you saw a hole. You saw water running into a place that water wasn't supposed to be running. You saw bricks kind of moving and falling out, and you saw one of the sides of your porch sloping down, and you did nothing about it, and now you're in shock and wonder as to, oh my goodness, my house has collapsed. And you did nothing in 240 years to secure the foundation. The revolution was fought on the foundation of the Bible. And the founding fathers built America on the foundation of the Bible. And there was a period of time in our history where it was inviolate. It was the foundation of life. And I lived in the school system when prayer was taken out of school. I used to go to school and we prayed.
Yeah.
It didn't have any meaning. It really, honestly, and this is from a Jewish kid perspective, we sang Christmas carols in the school choir. We cut out and colored Christmas decorations. We dyed Easter eggs. I lived in a Jewish community. Okay? This is part of the public school system. It's part of curriculum. Okay? It had no impact whatsoever on shaping or corroding or eroding my identity. As a matter of fact, because my father worked in retail and had to work during the holidays, I wound up singing with the Catholic Boys Choir. I can sing all the Christmas carols in Latin and in English.
Wow.
And all I know is every time I would walk into the church, the Catholic Church, and I saw this man hanging over the door, all I would think is well, maybe that's what they do to people to sing off tune. I don't really know, but I'm going to make sure that I'm on pitch and I remember the words.
Practice those scales. Yeah.
Exactly. Whatever he did, I'd...
Not going there.
I can read a warning. I hear you loud and clear. But the impressions. I think I told you this, that as a Jewish comic book kid, and I would drive down the street, and I would see a Lutheran church. I thought Lex Luthor was the church of Lex Luthor. That was the only Luther I knew in my life, was the archenemy of Superman.
Yep.
What context? So when you think about somebody else's perspective and point of view, the Episcopal Church, I found out that they had the Archbishop of Canterbury. I thought they used the Canterbury Tales. I thought that was a pretty cool place.
You probably expected to see him coming in the sanctuary with his bow and arrow, right?
Because who teaches you comparative religion and stuff from the Jewish? Christianity might, the Christian schools might, but in the Jewish education system, you didn't talk about something that you wanted nothing to do with. So they had their own God. Jesus was the God of the Gentiles. So why do you want to talk about that's another God? You don't talk about that. So I guess part of that shaping of the view, comical but confusing, and in a time when the shaping of America in the 60s and 70s, America was really being shaped, and that's who look who's running the country now.
Yeah.
The same people that I smoked dope with and did LSD with, and I know their backstories. If Penn State's on their resume, and trust me, I knew them.
Well, I go back. You were talking, and I thought it was a great analogy about not maintaining the foundation of the house. I would go even maybe a little, add a little bit to that. And that it's not only didn't they maintain it, they didn't even examine it. Because our research shows that when we talk with people about the state of the nation and whether things are good or bad and why they believe that way, what we discover is that people have no idea what's in the Constitution. People have never read the Declaration of Independence. They don't know what the Mayflower Compact is. They don't know squat about the Bill of Rights. And so if you don't know any of those things, why would you be concerned about whether or not they're being upheld? If you don't know anything about that kind of history, how could you put that together with the fact that some of our rights are being taken away that were based on God's word? Concepts like freedom, George Washington didn't make that up while he was crossing the Delaware. I mean, that was a concept that God developed and offered to mankind to give us a better life. But it comes with responsibilities and commitments. So, Americans just don't have that kind of context for understanding anymore. In the same way that when you would roll down the street when you were a kid and see, a Lutheran church and think, Lex Luthor's people, you had no context for understanding. Nobody had given you the big picture and put the pieces together. That's what a worldview does. It puts the pieces together. It's one of those pictures where you got dots and numbers and you got to attach the right dots to each other based on the numbers. We're not doing that. What we're doing is we're giving people pieces of paper with a lot of dots and saying, draw whatever picture you want to. Whatever you come up with is fine. It's not the way it's supposed to be.
George, I must be a freak because there's 4 items that are always with me. Okay? There's the Christian Bible.
Yeah.
There is the Tanakh in Hebrew and English.
Right.
There is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States.
Wow.
And a pocket version, including the Articles of Confederation, the Virginia Statute of Religious Liberties, plans to create a national government, the New Jersey or Patterson Plan, the Great Compromise. All of that is by my hand for immediate reference because these are the foundations under which I live. And therefore, I have to check them regularly to make sure that I am walking the plumb line that are established in these documents and constantly correcting my course because I will drift. I'm a drifter. There's a difference between being tethered and being anchored. And you take a hot air balloon that's tethered, it's going to fly in a 360. It might can only go so far, but it's not going to maintain a position. Anchored to the ground, fixed in place. These are my anchors, not my tethers. And keeps me grounded to the point where I can defend biblically and constitutionally my position. So I must be like, you know, a Marvel comic book character, some freak of nature, because they're, I mean, on set, they're right by me. On my office, they're right by me. Another set are right by me. And wherever I am in a setting of study, these are the documents that are the go-to documents for all that I do. Long before I go to the, you know what a commentator is, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's an ordinary potato. It's a spud. It's a commentator. It's a, you know, most of them like Idaho. A lot of people like French fries, and so a commentator. You know, you understand.
You need help.
Right. So why would I want to take instruction from a commentator? A spud, when I can have the authoritative document.
But you realize, of course, I know you know this, but I mean, children in American schools today never read the Constitution, never read the Declaration, never read any of the founding documents, don't know who the founding fathers were or what drove them to do what they wound up doing. You know, I had lunch not too long ago. I was working on a project and I had a copy of the Constitution with me, among some other things, when we went to lunch. And I put all my books and papers on the table as we got ready to eat. And he said, "Oh, what do you got there? A little library, huh?" I said, "Yeah, well, I got, you know, this, Constitution, blah, blah, blah." He looked at me, his eyes got wide. He said, "Constitution? Where'd you get one of those? You know, you can have." I mean, he was just, he couldn't speak. He was speechless. He had no idea, you know, and that's what we've come to in America today. I think what we're doing is we're waiting for ABC News and Fox News and, you know, Lindsey Graham to tell us what's in the Constitution. Otherwise, you know, it's in the Holy of Holies. Nobody can have access to that. We've just completely lost touch with that. And of course, it's no different with the Bible. People know you can get a Bible, and the average household owns 5 or 6 of them in America. But do they ever open them? Do they read them? More than that, do they study them? Do they intellectually and morally own the Bible? Not really.
I have my mother's Bible given to her on confirmation. It had never been opened.
Oh.
I use it for wedding ceremonies because it's the oldest Bible in my family. Because as you're in Judaism is for your for a boy you're bar mitzvahed, and then if you stay on for 2 more years of study you're confirmed. For girls, they didn't have at that time bat mitzvahs for girls, but they just had confirmation, and so they would present you with a Bible. For a man, you would get a Bible, and you would get a prayer book, a Siddur, a home prayer book with all the blessings, so that you could be the head of the household and know all of the traditional blessings. And so I went through that process. Even though I was shipped off, I was able to complete and get it, but not given a Bible. My mother was given a Bible. I was given a prayer book. So this was the oldest Bible, and so when I saw she still had it, because you don't throw a Bible away. It's still a sacred text to a Jewish person, even though they've never opened it. You don't dispose of a sacred text. So I asked her, I said, "Do you mind if I take it?" She said, "Well, I have no use for it. Of course you can take it."
Oh man.
So it was, I mean, the red, it had a red border on it, black cover, red border, bright red border. It was still bright red. It was pristine. It was just absolutely beautiful. Had never, ever been opened. And her position is that first she was boycotting God. I said, okay. Then
how's that going?
At 94, she told me she was on strike from God. I said, so this is encouraging to me. in order to be on strike means you had to be a part of the labor force, so you must have somehow made your way into a relationship, and now you're just, before you're boycotting it, now you're on strike. And she said, well, I'm going to have to think about that, and I'll get back to you and see if I change my position. So she's 94, and her 90-year-old boyfriend just moved in with her.
There you go.
So, of course, my question was, am I going to get the phone call saying that I have a brother?
Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changing.
The times they are changing. So as we look at the survey, and we come to the election, and the release you put out was Trump, the last conservative president, ? Is something that I've been involved in many discussions about the biblical correlation between what is going to set the stage for the rise of the Antichrist. There has to be a move, there has to be a global shift towards the parameters in which God has given us, both through the spoken word of Jesus and through the teachings of Paul, as to what those last days look like. So you can push against it politically and opinion-wise and all these things, but there's a specific set of events, of lawlessness, of debauchery, of sexual immorality, of wars and rumors of wars and pestilence, and all these things must happen, and this is not the end, these are just the birth pains. So one side of me doesn't like the idea of having a liberal agenda in the White House, and new relations with Iran, and seeing Israel now positioned well, almost to the fulfillment of one of the prerequisites of Ezekiel 38, which Israel is at peace with their neighbors. Wow, we didn't see that one coming 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That's a big check mark in the prerequisites for Ezekiel 38.
Yeah.
Israel is at peace with their neighbors. So now that that's been accomplished, then the next step has to be the formation of the coalition of Gog-Magog. And we have a potential new administration that is going to align itself with Turkey, Iran, and with Gomer, Germany, and the EU, join all the old accords and renew all that was undone, while in this 4-year period, all these other prophetic things fell into place that were all ordained by God, because they couldn't have happened any other way. So do we look at this as that having been accomplished, and now we need to go to the next phase in the development of moving towards the rise of the son of perdition, a setting of a stage where there's going to be a watered down, dumbed down, lukewarm body that's just going to go along with a globalization plan. And it's all part of God's plan to move us, got to move the pegs forward, push the war room, take the stick and push your tank just a little bit further towards the mark. And are we actually positioning ourselves to try to come against the will of God in advancing His agenda, which is going to be the eventual rise of the Antichrist, the eventual 3.5 years of a covenant made with many, the eventual rise of the 10 kingdoms, the eventual rise of the defilement of the temple, the eventual rise of the Antichrist system of trade, the mark of the beast, and ushering in the return, the raising up of the armies of the Antichrist, and finally the call for Jesus' return. That's bad news in the natural, but in the supernatural, it's the best. That's the hope that I have in 1 Peter 3:15. So, conflicted a little bit by saying, how aggressive do I need to be? And is this the plan of God to advance His agenda, since He's the one that sets up kings and tear down kingdoms?
And it's interesting to me to hear that, which I love hearing that. I'd love to hear more about that. The average American, however, it's like a chess grandmaster playing somebody who just learned how to play checkers. And the checkers guy is sitting here thinking, I don't know what the heck he's talking about, but all I know is I think I'm entitled to some stuff here, and I want them to deliver it, and I want it now. I deserve it because, daggone it, don't you know who I am? I'm a human being, and it's my right to have that delivered to me. And America's the place that owes it to me. And I mean, that's about as deep as it gets. Spiritually, yeah, maybe there's God, maybe there isn't God. What does He have to do with all this anyway? It's become so much about self and not worrying what the elites are doing because they're playing their games, and not worrying about end times or tomorrow because we're living for today, baby. Bring it on. Make me comfortable, make me happy, entertain me. These are, I mean, I actually did a study recently where I compared the values of colonial America to the values of contemporary America. Not only is there not a single overlap of any of those values between the top 10 of the 16 and 1700s versus today, but when you look at the values of today, the one summary word that I think screams out from it is me. It's all about me. And yet, when you look back at colonial America, they weren't perfect. I know they had problems too. I'm not trying to idealize it. But it's such a stark contrast. The word that I probably would have used to characterize colonial America was community. It's about what we do together. It's about how we serve each other. It's about how we understand each other's hurts and needs and accomplishments and celebrate those things together. Completely different mindset and orientation. And again, I think this is leading us down a path that ultimately drives a bigger wedge between us and God. God's willing to overcome it. We're the one that keeps trying to create a better wedge.
So interesting you use the checkers analogy, because what happens when I move my man to your farthest place? You cry out, "King me." And so you get a checker added to you. Now that has more power, right? So now king me. So everybody's striving for their own coronation in a checkers match, where it's the defeat of the king, the taking of the king, and the overthrowing of the king in the chess match. And so one is strategically for domination, the other one is strategically for self-edification and for self-promotion. King me.
Yeah.
People take it so literally that when you're born and the baby's head begins to appear, they've elevated that to call it
the crown of the head.
Crowning. So I'm like almost born, like the minute any part of me enters this world, I've entered royalty. They make this declaration, the baby's crowning. And it's so seeped into. It's that leaven that all of a sudden takes on its own life, and it's bizarre. And as you and I look at it, and these things occur to us contemporaneously, and we start looking at piecing things together, language defines, how we use language defines much of our perspective. And so when you start from birth, declaring the royalty of every single child that's born by saying he's crowned. Uh,
Yeah.
and parents lying to their children, absolutely lying. You can be anything you want to be.
The Disney fantasy.
You
Yeah.
know, I'm 5'10", 160 pounds. All right. Uh, the Hall of Fame for Jewish basketball players,
It's a small club.
you know, Too Tall Schwartz, Magic Horowitz, Kareem Abdul-Rosenblatt. I mean, it's just not there. I can't be anything I want to be.
Yeah.
So this worldview that's developed, you talk about in early life, this is parents who are influencing their children to have an expectation of something that's not based in reality.
Well, and you know, one of the things that surprises a lot of parents when I talk with them about this whole process is as you read through scripture, I think one conclusion you could come to is that the single most important thing you may wind up doing as a human being is raising your children to know, love, and serve God, understanding his commands, obeying them, realizing that that obedience is your success in life. It's not your bank account, your car, your house. It's what's the nature of that relationship? Do you know who he is? Do you know that he knows you? He loves you. He cares about you. He wants you to behave and live a certain way for certain prescribed purposes. Can you get that across to your children and prepare them to inhabit that kind of a life? Wow, what an opportunity. Parents don't see it that way. You know, most American parents are worried about, I don't know, is he going to be Harvard or Yale? You know, is he going to be a doctor or a lawyer? You know, all these things that have nothing to do with why they're here on earth. And so to bring parents back to, you know, a Deuteronomy 6 or the various passages in the course of Proverbs talking about how you raise up children, the kinds of values you need to incorporate in their mind and their heart, this is a revelation to them. And the question then becomes, well, wait a minute, isn't your church helping you to understand this? Isn't your church preparing you for this most significant job in your life? Isn't your church there supporting you every day, equipping you, encouraging you, celebrating you as you enable your child to be more Christ-like, to come closer to God, to do the things that he literally allowed you to bear that child to do? And you know, the common answer is no. You know, so this is why we have this worldview crisis in America. We've now had multiple generations where the church stopped paying attention to children, stopped paying attention to the equipping of parents to raise up godly children. And now those individuals have grown up with no memory of it because it was never there in the first place in their lives. And so they're gleaning their worldview from all the different experiences and relationships they have in the world. The body of Christ really isn't part of that to a significant degree. And so we're allowing Hollywood and New York and DC and all these other halls of worldly power to be dictating to us the nature of human beings, the source of truth, what that truth is, what morality really means and how it feels and what family could be if we just open our minds and expand our horizons. You know, what the value of life really is. All these things. I mean, we're just completely missing the boat. I'm looking at this pandemic as a gift from God in many ways. One of those is that we know that 20 to 30%, as much as 50% in some areas and some situations, of people who used to be regular church attenders are no longer going to be attending a church. I don't think that's bad. What I do think potentially is bad is if we don't have followers of Christ who are ready to start relating to those people and leading them, helping them to grow, being the church. God in the Bible never called us to go to church. He called us to be the church. And so this now is our moment to be the church. People who have a biblical worldview. It's a pressure time, honestly, because now there's going to be millions and millions of people who used to think, well, I get my spiritual stuff from a church. They're not going to do that anymore. You make a habit in 30 days, it's been, 9, 10 months. We've broken the church going habit. And so we got to create some new habits that are going to draw people closer to God's word, closer to his heart, closer to his purpose. And it's going to be a real time of a different reformation. And I'm hoping that the believers, the real integrated disciples, that's what we call the people with a biblical worldview, because they've integrated God's word into their mind, their heart, their soul. They've integrated it into every dimension of life. They want to be disciples. They're following Jesus. They want to be just like him, and they want others to be like him. Integrated disciples. Are the integrated disciples ready for this moment when we can now be the church in a way that we couldn't before?
So interesting. You know, I'm a contextualist, so when I look at the words of Jesus and remembering that there was no New Testament at the time of Jesus, so it just because it's in there doesn't mean that he was quoting New Testament thought. He was
Right.
he was saying things to a Jewish audience in a Jewish context. So when he was asked what the greatest commandment was, okay, he starts you off with the first part of Deuteronomy 6:5.
Right.
To every person who was in its hearing, the Hebrew mind finishes the entire concept. It's the rabbinical way. You're taught to respond. I give you the first 4 or 5 words of a passage. You tell me the rest of the passage. So here he's dealing with an audience that understands this. So he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. Finish the passage. And these words which I command you this day are to be on your heart, and you're to teach them to your children. And you're to talk about them when you lie down and when you rise up, when you walk along the way. And so this global reset said, okay, you didn't learn it in church. You went off to grown-up church. You said your kids to kids' church. You got back together again and had a meal. You never talked about it again. I'm sticking you back at home. You've now binge-watch all the Netflix you can. As a last resort, you're going to turn to some kind of biblical teaching, and maybe you'll figure out that God's calling you to teach your children. And I'm going to give you a global reset to go back to the first commandment. Okay? And I'm going to let you finish it now and apply it the way I gave it to you. And this is what Jesus said. Okay? Just because he started the passage, we are to finish the passage in a concept that he presented to us. Then he said, now once you've done this, you're now prepared to go love your neighbor in your community. Right? Now everybody's, who do you know? Oh, I know the lady next door. I never knew her before. A person across the street. I didn't even know their name. Right? Oh, you need help with that box? Let me help you with that box. All of a sudden now community comes into play. That was the second command, to love your neighbor as yourself. And so that's what we got sent home to do, because we failed and we put all the emphasis on, oh, the youth pastor's supposed to teach my kids. I don't have to do that. And the pastor's supposed to teach me, but he gives me snippet theology. I get 2 verses, and then I get a country club story, and I remember the punchline of the joke. I just don't remember the scriptures, And I'm going to tell the story all week. I'm just not going to include the scriptures because, that was the Bible, and that's not funny, and that's it. But it was a great story. And so I think God has sent us home and said, listen, do not cast go. Do not collect $200. All right? Go directly to jail. All right? And get it right. I'm giving you opportunity. And if you accept it, you'll be able to reshape your children's lives and your relationship with them, and use this as an opportunity and a gift from God. And It's not punishment. It's not judgment. It's saying, look, you got to get back to the basics. You've been missing it.
I mean, it's a period of time where all the research has shown us that people are less happy. There's record numbers of depression and suicide and all that. So, I mean, there's a great opportunity here for us to, if we just be willing to reflect on what life is really about, what gives it meaning, what does God have to do with it? Man, we could really make, like they say, lemonade out of this lemon that we think we've been given. I mean, this is a tremendous opportunity for us to do something significant, to reshape history in a better way. Part of it will be going back to what our forefathers knew. Part of it will be discovering new ways to apply ancient truths to a world that's very different. And that's kind of an exciting place to be if we can see it that way and recognize that, well, but the only way that you build something that's going to last and is going to work is if you'll have the strong foundation. And that's where I think that worldview comes in. That is the foundation. So I'm hoping that the integrated disciples who get it are willing to go out and share it in ways that it spreads like wildfire.
I pray that this great awakening that people are talking about will come, and that it will ignite people to true faith, not just the Christcapades, the great music and the swirling and the dancing and all the on the surface stuff, but you never go below whatever the blade will take you. That's as far as it goes. We've been talking with George Barna, as we do on this second Thursday of every month at the 11 o'clock hour, as we talk about the great research that they're doing out of Arizona Christian University as the Director of Research and the Cultural Research Center. You can find out more at culturalresearchcenter.com. George, I wish you and your family just an avalanche of blessings over this holiday season, and look forward to you rejoining us for Season 5 as we launch our 5th year of the broadcast in January, and look forward to having you back on the second Thursday of January, as I will be 1 year older and 1 year away from what the Bible tells me is my expiration date, 70, and we'll see how well I do with the odds, as I navigate one more time around the sun.
Right. There you go. I'm looking forward to being there with you, my friend. Thank you so much. God
bless you, and thank you, and blessings to you and your household. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.